Good afternoon and welcome to today's webinar on Afghanistan with World Oregon and Global Minnesota in partnership. We are broadcasting this now, recording for posterity and for future posting on YouTube. And for those of you who've joined us or Global Minnesota in the past, you know to please mind your P's and Q's so we can have a respectful program. We will have opportunity for you to pose questions in the Q&A function of Zoom. And we will post links to relevant information in the chat function of Zoom. The only ones who will have their video and audio on are the presenters and World Oregon staff. We are joined by Mark Ward and Zaher Wahab. I will do short introductions for them in a minute. We're having some technical difficulties with Mr. Wahab, who will be joining us soon, we hope. As with all webinars, this is an opportunity for Global Minnesota and World Oregon members and community supporters to join us and learn and discuss issues going on the day. This is one of many programs going on throughout the World Affairs Councils of America network on Afghanistan and the momentous events of the last several weeks. Hope that you can continue to join some of the other programs upcoming, including one that our sister organization in LA is doing with former ambassador to Afghanistan. Again, there's others. We had a program that the World Affairs Councils of America ran the other day on the Afghanistan papers, many more to come. Hopefully today is part of that larger picture. So if we don't address everything in today's program, that's on purpose because we do have other programs throughout the network addressing other aspects of it. Again, I'd like to thank our partners at Global Minnesota, in particular, their director, Mark Ritchie, and Carolina Gustafson, who worked closely with our director of programs here at World Oregon, Tim DeRoche, in setting up today's programming and in promoting it throughout the World Affairs Council network. It is our first program here back in the fall. I hope you've had a good summer. I know it's been a little bit of ups and downs with the coronavirus Delta variant, and so I wish you all the best health. And just a reminder, we're going to continue to have our programs virtually because of the ongoing challenge with the pandemic. And now to today's program. Today's program is entitled Afghanistan Inside and Out, a conversation with Mark Ward and Zaher Wahab. Mark is a retired career diplomat who recently left Afghanistan, where he was country director for the International Medical Corps for 2 years after leaving the State Department. And he now lives in Corvallis, Oregon. He was also previously country director for the International Medical Corps in Afghanistan. He's run the Office of Foreign Disaster Assistance at USAID. He was a special advisor on development to the special representative of the Secretary General for the UN Assistance Mission in Afghanistan. Just a wide range of diplomatic service for country and the United Nations. And as I mentioned, we'll be joined later in the program with Zaher Wahab, who's taught for many years at Lewis and Clark College, a close partner of World Oregon. More recently living in Kabul and teaching at the American University of Afghanistan. He also served as senior advisor to the Minister of Higher Education in Afghanistan for 5 years from 2002 to 2007, and was instrumental in designing and teaching in the only master's degree program for teacher education faculty throughout Afghanistan. And he's a past speaker for World Oregon. We're thrilled to have Mark join us for the first time. And I'd like to give Tim, my colleague, a chance to give some intro questions for Mark to talk about some of his experiences. And then again, later in the program, after Zaher joins us, we will go to audience Q&A. So get your questions ready for the Q&A function. I will go dark and pass the baton over to Tim and Mark. Thanks again for joining us.
Great. Thank you, Derek, so much. Mark, I'm really glad you could be here with us today. You're going to get the disembodied voice of Tim DeRoche. I am the director of programs for World Oregon. I'm going to be the voice because I want to keep the attention on you and Professor Wahab. So, Mark, you've got a long background working in Afghanistan, as Derek mentioned, with the International Medical Corps, with USAID, with the UN. It's not fruitful, as we discussed the other day, to look backwards and play the blame game and talk about, you know, who did what and what went wrong. But going forward, I'm kind of curious if you can frame what you think the big challenges are, both the immediate in particular in front of us, what this looks like in the next 8 months or year, and how we can best approach thinking about this as both citizens and, this audience is filled full of watchers of international issues, what the sort of best practices might be.
Sure, Tim, Derek, thank you very much. Give me a thumbs up, well, a verbal thumbs up, if you can hear me okay.
Yes, we can. Coming
Great.
loud and clear.
So thanks, World Oregon. This is my new home. Happy to be here. Thanks, Global Minnesota. Your good friend, Ross Wilson, deserves a lot of praise for his heroic duty, which he just completed in Afghanistan. I saw Ross a couple of times before the virus hit, and I was in meetings inside the embassy. He went out there thinking he was going to stay for a couple of months between ambassadors. He ended up staying, 1.5 years, I think, during, the most tumultuous time. So everybody, hats off to Ross. As you heard, I have spent a lot of my career working on and in Afghanistan. And I think I do have a somewhat unique perspective because I work from 3 different angles: the US government, the United Nations, and finally, after retiring the first time, I ran a humanitarian organization in Afghanistan for 2 years, and I left 2 months ago. And yeah, we're all very depressed by recent events in Afghanistan over the last couple of weeks. But as Derek and Tim said, I think there'll be plenty of time later to analyze the decisions that were made. Some of them I'm probably guilty of when I was with the US government. I think the important thing now is to pitch in and help the Afghans that are there and the Afghans that are arriving here. So I'd like to give you 3 practical suggestions that we can do as Americans to try to help. Number 1 is to tell your congressional delegation to support continued humanitarian funding for Afghanistan. I mean, this is really a no-brainer. The humanitarian organizations that deliver humanitarian assistance never left. They're still at work, and their work is urgent. Some of their international staff left, that's true. I left the International Medical Corps, but the Afghan staff are still there, and they're very professional. The needs are great. The country is suffering from another drought. There are food shortages, and the internally displaced population is bigger than ever, thanks to all the fighting. The humanitarian organizations need funding, and donor countries like the United States, the largest funder, should support them to send a message to the Afghan people that we continue to care, even if we sent our troops home. Humanitarian aid goes straight to the humanitarian organization or the UN agency that's doing the work. It never passes through the government, and it won't pass through the Taliban. Now, everyone wants to know if the gains that have been made in Afghanistan by women, by civil society, and in healthcare over the last 20 years are going to be rolled back or whether they will continue. My advice to the donor countries is to keep humanitarian aid flowing at full throttle, both because the needs are great and because it gives us an opportunity to test the Taliban's words. They're saying the right things in Kabul. Their PR people are. But there are worrying signs when you look at their behavior, both in Kabul and in some of the provinces. One thing I'm particularly worried about as the former head of a humanitarian organization is, are they going to allow our female staff to continue to work in the field? We have to be rigorous about enforcing humanitarian principles. We can't allow shortcuts to try to curry favor with the new rulers. Otherwise, we won't see if the Taliban is serious about abiding by international law and principles like they say they are. Now, I'm going to make myself unpopular with some of you and say that I'm worried about the UN agencies in this regard. Will they stand up to the Taliban? Will they stand with the humanitarian organizations, for example, to insist that women be allowed to work in the field, where half of the beneficiaries are, after all, women? Or will they compromise to appease the new sheriff in town? Second, all of us can support the humanitarian organizations ourselves. Let's not leave it up to Congress entirely. And you know who they are. Save the Children, Catholic Relief, CARE, International Rescue Committee, International Medical Corps, and for those of us here in Oregon, Mercy Corps, we know very well. And there are many more. Go to their websites and make a tax-deductible contribution to help them keep going at this very critical time in Afghanistan. Because again, this sends a very strong message to the Afghan people that the American people are still with them, and that these organizations are much more than the support they get from governments, but that they are supported by people as well, like you and me. And finally, third, and maybe the most urgent, is to think about the thousands of Afghans and their families who are arriving in the US now every day. World Oregon told me that they would post the names of the agencies helping the new arrivals in Oregon on their website. And maybe Global Minnesota can do the same for Minnesota. The refugees need lots of help, from spare rooms to help driving folks to appointments in their new cities, to hosting meals, and it's all extremely useful. And the benefits flow both ways. My family, I'm proud to say, helped a Syrian family resettle in Eugene, Oregon, a couple of years ago. And today, it's terrific. Their family and our family are close friends. We spend all the holidays together, Muslim and Christian. So that's it. It's a very short list. Continue to support humanitarian aid in Afghanistan, both through the Congress, through appropriations, and with our own tax-deductible contributions, and reach out and volunteer to help the new refugees that are arriving in our communities. I hope those suggestions are helpful. I hope they're forward-looking, can get us invigorated to help when things are fairly grim, and I look forward to your questions. Thanks very much.
Great, Mark, thanks so much. Just a note for the audience, we are still having some technical issues with Professor Wahab, so I'm gonna jump into some questions with Mark. Mark, you brought up some really great points, and I'm wondering, as you look at this transition, there are a number of things that are front and center right now. One needn't have a crystal ball to see a potential looming humanitarian crisis, severe drought, growing food insecurity, displacement. Are there any existing safety nets in this moment of chaos and transition over there?
Yeah, I mean, the great thing about supporting the humanitarian organizations that are there now and have been there for decades is just that. They've been there. This is nothing new. This is keeping going what is already in place. So it's not like the organization, for example, the one that I led, International Medical Corps, they don't need to go to the eastern provinces of Afghanistan and establish operations. They're already there. They've been there for decades, nearly 40 years. And some of the other big international humanitarian organizations based in the US are the same. So yes, there are safety nets in place. Yes, there are camps for IDPs. Yes, there are programs in remote villages to deal with the drought and to provide medical care, and even to help with girls' education and some of the other things that we're so worried about right now. And these don't have to, get established and start over a period of time. They're already running. They may have taken a short break when the Taliban first took over, where everybody was trying to see what would happen, but everybody's back at work now. And so there's no time for delay. We need to push those programs, as I said, show the Afghan people we care, and let's see if the Taliban is serious about helping the Afghan people by backing off, not interfering, and letting the humanitarian organizations do their work professionally according to humanitarian principles.
Well, that brings up an interesting point. Much has been rumored about a, quote, kinder, gentler Taliban with regards to women and retribution for Afghans who might have aided the US and allies. Is this lip service, and what can the world that is watching do to hold them accountable as part of an international community?
Yeah, I mean, I don't want to be accused of, wearing rose-colored glasses, but I did just work there for 2 years, and the organization that I led was providing humanitarian aid in provinces in the east, bordering on Pakistan, and many of the districts in those provinces were controlled by the Taliban. So we have a lot of experience with the Taliban. And I can say that in most cases, and maybe this is helpful in predicting their behavior in the future, in most cases, when it came to humanitarian aid that the communities needed, they were cooperative. There are always exceptions. And to use diplomatic language, there were jerks, and there were jerks with guns. So they were, we could ignore them. But generally speaking, the Taliban officials in the districts that they controlled, when we talked to them and explained what we are doing and how we do it, and principles of neutrality, for example, that we don't choose sides, we treat everyone without regard to their political affiliation or anything else, they usually backed off and did not interfere with our work. The fact that the communities supported us and needed what we were providing helped a lot. And that was also perhaps indicative of something hopeful for the future, that the Taliban leadership seemed to care what the communities wanted and needed. So if we're looking for optimism, there's practice over the last couple of years that I saw, and practice that the organization I led, IMC, saw for decades, that there is a willingness to cooperate, but we do need to test that now, as I said, and I think the best way to do that is to keep all of these programs going and push the Taliban not to interfere and to respect the principles that govern these programs.
You brought that up, and you brought up the question of the UN. And I know you were worried the other day when we spoke about being controversial with criticism, but I don't think that's a new criticism. I mean, we hear that a lot, whether it's Yemen or Syria or Rwanda or now in Afghanistan. But is there more that the UN can do to apply these pressures to adhere to humanitarian principles?
I think they need to stand in solidarity with the humanitarian organizations and demand that the Taliban play by the rules. And the rules are simple, the 5 humanitarian principles and international law. If we start compromising, if we start equivocating on some of those principles, and for example, go along with some of the Taliban leaders, not all, but some of the Taliban leaders who are telling our staff, women can stay in the office, but they can't work in the field, then we all lose. Our assistance will not be effective because in Afghanistan, a very conservative society, women in the villages who need our help can't interact with men. They can't interact with strangers who are male. And so we could see a situation, if women are not allowed to work in the field, where half of our beneficiaries are effectively taken off the rolls. The UN needs to stand with the humanitarian organizations to say no to this, and go to the leadership of the Taliban in Kabul and discuss this and look for some leadership at this most critical time. And not be too worried about, disagreeing with the Taliban and pushing back. That's what leaders do. And we need leadership from the UN right now.
So in terms of legitimacy as a new government, what is it going to take for the Taliban, but also for, say, the EU and some of our allies? I mean, the EU has certainly come out and said they will not be recognized until they approach, some form of inclusive government, that they are respecting human rights, and really creating a situation where there is unfettered access for aid workers. And is this even likely, do you think?
I don't know anymore because I'm no longer with the State Department, but I would not be surprised if those conversations have already begun with leaders from many donor countries, Western countries that supported Afghanistan. I hope those conversations have begun. And I hope and I trust that the issue that I'm talking about, which you mentioned, following the humanitarian principles for the delivery of humanitarian aid in Afghanistan, and including women, and not interfering in our programs, and not choosing sides, and not using politics to determine who are the beneficiaries and who are not. I hope that is part of what the West is going to look for when it comes to the question of recognition. It won't be the only thing. There are obviously many other important issues, such as renunciation, both in word and deed, of ties to Al-Qaeda and its affiliates, and other national security issues. But this is critically important too. And if the Taliban looks forward to a day when the West, including the United States, can continue to provide support to that country, because we do care about the Afghan people, then this is going to be terribly important. And I hope they get that. And I hope they realize the importance of getting help from the outside in order to govern Afghanistan.
Great. Thanks, Mark. Just a note to the audience, I have put into the chat both local resources, the 3 agencies that are doing resettlement, also some national resources for those of you who are joining us from around the country. This is the list of national refugee resettlement agencies, of which our 3, which is SOAR, that's Ecumenical Ministries, Lutheran Community Services, and Catholic Charities, work with. I will also post a little bit later some local nonprofits that are doing work helping and aiding immigrants and refugees once they are actually have gone through resettlement here. So back onto the question of evacuation, we have a question from one of our audience. In addition to the urgent evacuation of Afghan evacuees, what will the ongoing process for refugees and asylum seekers perhaps look like? Many have been focusing on prioritizing those aligned with the US government, but what about vulnerable groups, ethnic minorities? Is there any positive outlook on that front?
I don't know any more than you do in terms of what's in the press, but going back to the last question that I answered, I hope that when Western officials are discussing with the new Taliban leadership what it will take to consider recognition, this issue has to be there. How is the new government in Kabul going to deal with those who still wish to leave? And if they have permission from an outside country, will that be honored? And this is a principle of international law, which they should be expected to abide by. To remind our government and the EU and the UK and others that the Taliban is talking to really hammer this point home, because recognition should be contingent on that and other issues as well.
And I'm going to jump in here. This is Derek Olson, World Oregon. We're pleased to have Professor Wahab join us by phone. I had some technical challenges. Mark, thanks for the great answer. Tim, thought maybe you could give a chance for Professor Wahab, who we've introduced, to say a few words, and you could give him a lead in.
Absolutely. You had jumped right in front of me. I was all set to do that. Professor Wahab, thanks for joining us. Apologies for any technical challenges you've been having. as Derek mentioned in his intro, you served as a senior advisor to the Minister of Higher Education in Afghanistan for 5 years, right after the fall of the Taliban, which was really a rebuilding period. And you also have been involved in education for years, and more recently were teaching in Kabul. I'm wondering if you can talk about how you see this transition of a Taliban government affecting schools and civil society going forward, and is there a role that the U.S. can play in guaranteeing some semblance of adherence to civil rights or human rights around this?
Yes, good morning or good afternoon, and my apologies for the technical difficulties. I'm very sorry. Well, I'd like to go back a little bit. When President Biden spoke the day before yesterday, he said, the best decision for the United States was to withdraw from Afghanistan. Maybe it was for the United States. I would have expected him to say also to perhaps say something about Afghanistan and the 34 million people who live in Afghanistan. I would have liked them to say that, the invasion, the occupation of Afghanistan was wrong, it was unnecessary, it was illegal, it was immoral, and it was criminal. Because Afghanistan had nothing to do with 9/11, or very little to do with 9/11. Also, I want to point out that when people talk about a 20-year war, for one, this was not a war because the Afghans have not declared war on America or anybody else. But also the United States began intervening indirectly in Afghanistan in the 1950s through the SEATO Pact in Pakistan, and then in 1973 when Dawood tried to build a country, and then in 1978 when the PDPA tried to build a nation state, and then in 2001. So the U.S. meddling in Afghanistan goes back to at least 40 years. And at one point, as you know, it wasn't just the United States, occupying and savaging Afghanistan, but it also 40 other countries with some 150,000 soldiers and the most sophisticated weaponry were savaging Afghanistan the size of Texas. And in the process over the last 20 years, they destroyed the Afghan economy, society, culture, and polity, and killed numerous human beings and numerous animals. And most Americans get their information through the corporate media. Where was the media all these years, except for the last 2 weeks when, as if, there was Afghanistan were an airport. There was no mention of the country, of the nation, of the people, of, and how and why it's suffering, and what the problems are. So, the focus the last 2 weeks was on the Kabul airport, and it's not a Kabul airport, it's the Hamid Karzai International Airport. And also, as I said, Afghanistan is a country, it's not an airport. But that's what the corporate media did. There was no history, no depth, no analysis, and how and why the American government and the puppet Afghan government created this crisis at the airport, and how they're perpetuating it, and how they're benefiting from this. And so it was all, it was sensationalism, self-serving, and therapy for the nice Americans, and blaming the victims and no mention of the victimizers. There was no mention of imperialism, of colonialism, of Orientalism, of racism, and of Islamophobia. As if history began on August 15th, and it probably would, to them, it's ended with the withdrawal of the American forces. I think it's a shame. It's a disservice. It's an insult to all decent Americans. Moving forward, I will be very brief. I think we need to engage the Taliban diplomatically. The world should apologize to them, especially the United States and its so-called allies, for destroying the country. And they should immediately release The World Bank should release its money, the IMF should, the Federal Reserve should, and the Western Union. And there should be no proxy wars of any kind on Afghanistan, cyber wars or economic wars, sanctions or anything else. And I think we need to activate the Interpol to capture all of the thieves, American thieves, international thieves, and the Afghan government who stole Afghan money and took the money out. Only 2% of the foreign aid that was given to Afghanistan over the last 20 years, just 2% reached the public, the target population. The West left the country, was stolen in all kinds of ways. So we need to activate the Interpol to repatriate the money and arrest the thieves, as I say. And then I would say convene tribunals, whether it's The Hague, the ICC, the United States, or other places, convene tribunals to try all of the warlords, all of the war criminals, wherever they are, the United States, in Europe, and in Afghanistan. They should be tried and should be penalized. And finally, I would say, mobilize the United Nations to form and put in place a peacekeeping and a developing force. The UN peacekeeping and developing force should be funded and also should be supported, authorized, and in every way given help by the invaders. Afghanistan is in shambles. There's a massive drought going on. There is the corona, and then there's also the conflict and the war. And I think we should not penalize the country. We should help the Afghan people so that they can lead normal lives and so that people can stay and commit themselves to the country. So I'll be happy to answer questions related to these.
Professor Wahab, thanks. That is an awful lot to consider and think about. Certainly it brings up some perspectives and points of view that I think probably challenge some assertions that the international community might have, especially around money and finance. I think when I read some of the issues around the World Bank and some of the funds being frozen, I interpret a lot of that as a carrot and stick. There's a lot of hesitancy, I think, on the part of immediately getting into a working relationship with the Taliban based on hardline events of the past in terms of the treatment of women, the position of education, which I know that you've dedicated your life to. What do you think the Taliban need to do in terms of reforming or softening some of their principles to allow for the US and for international allies to feel like we're in a safer collaborative space?
Yes. Well, many world leaders have said, Angela Merkel, Putin, Johnson, the British Prime Minister, and even the head of NATO, Stoltenberg, many of these people have said the takeover by the Taliban is sort of a reality and we have to recognize it, accept it, and deal with it. And what they have said is that we need to, and what I would be saying is that the Taliban are a reality. They live there, it's their country, they are a reality and we need to sort of engage them and deal with them. I think it would be nice if people listen to the Taliban press conferences. They have had several press conferences and others, where the leaders have spoken. The Taliban seem to be trying very hard, and they say, we need help. We need the international community. We need all the Afghans who are inside and outside the country. We're a poor, underdeveloped country. We have numerous challenges. We need all the help we can get so we can build our country. And I think that's what the world should respond to that, but also put conditions on them. Why is it that there's no analysis of, as I said, the U.S. and Afghan government, its puppet regimes? Why did it come to this? Why are these people riding the airplanes, flying airplanes? Why such hysteria, such madness, such deprivation, Why did this come about? How did this come about? What happened to the $2.2 trillion and the thousands of American lives and, the 20 years of massive occupation and bombardment. So I think the world should engage the Taliban and put conditions on them. And Taliban, and I think we need to understand that today's Taliban are not the same as 20 years ago. And the leadership today seems to be very different from the rank and files. These people have seen the world, from Washington to Moscow to Beijing. They speak English, fluent English, and Farsi and Pashto. They keep promising the world, and the Afghan people saying, we will do this, complete amnesty, security, safety, and we will do things, but they keep saying, this is going to be an Islamic emirate. We will have laws. Women will continue to educate and work. In fact, they're asking women to come and report to work and go to school and go to university, but they say according to Islamic law. I think maybe we should accept that at this point and then gradually, apply the sticks, the carrots, put conditions on the aid that the world is giving. And if they, if they violate their own promises and declarations and so forth, then I think the world should respond to that at that point. Because Afghanistan is not the same country. It's a different country. The men and women are different. But also, as I keep saying, the majority of the women in Afghanistan, as we speak, live in the Middle Ages. Why is no one talking about that? The World Food Program, Antonio Guterres, they're saying Afghanistan is walking to a massive famine, starvation. Why is no one talking about that? These are not Taliban. They're just ordinary people who are trying to feed themselves and their kids. Why is there no discussion? And why penalize these people for, say, the fault of a few leaders or a movement? So I would say the international community should really get involved in Afghanistan and keep applying. And there are many embassies that are open. They have not left. The UN is not leaving, and there are many people who keep saying, let's engage the Taliban. Otherwise, they will become more isolated, more radicalized, and there will be more problems, whether it's drugs, conflict, refugees, or whatever it is. And it makes perfect sense to me, it seems, that we should really deal with them on conditions.
Well, so Mark, I'd love you both, Professor Wahab and Mark, you both have rich backgrounds.
Call me Zaher, yeah.
With the country. Thank you, Zaher. Mark, what's your feeling in terms of engaging with the Taliban? Do we walk in with and give them the benefit of the doubt and a free pass, or do we really walk in carefully and think about strictures? Oh, you're muted, Mark.
We lost Mark now.
I agree with Zaher. It has to be a conditions-based approach, but it also has to be, we have to show some humility. We have to show respect. To put it bluntly, they won. And we lost.
Yes.
And we have already, over the course of the last couple of weeks and all the challenges at the airport, found some common ground. And that's something to build on. I think we also find common ground, as I said earlier, in the provision of humanitarian assistance. If they will not interfere, if they will let the aid reach those that it needs to reach without regard to which side people are on, but just that it be governed solely by need, whether it's need because of drought or need because of COVID or because of food insecurity, let that govern. These are all areas where we have seen common ground. And one thing you learn in a long career of diplomacy is you need common ground. You need that first thing you agree on to build. And then you find the second thing you agree on, and then the third. And after a while, you can broaden the conversation to include bigger issues like, how do you get the banking system running again? How do you unfreeze around the world? Because they are going to need to start paying the bills. They're saying to the people go back to work, particularly if you work in the ministries. How are they going to pay the salaries? There's no money in the bank. There may be a little bit left, going to run out. So unfreezing assets is terribly important, but that's tied up with recognition. So I agree, there should be some conditions. I hope that one thing I worry about right now, Tim, is that the world community may have different agendas for what those conditions are. I hope there are conversations going on, at least with the G7, so that there is a common agenda for those conversations with the Taliban, so that when Germany and the UK and the EU and the United States and Canada reach out and talk to the Taliban leadership, they've got the same script. So, because that would be very unfair, I think, to the Taliban to have every country asking for a different set of conditions. So I hope the United States behind the scene is working with its allies to agree on what it will take to get to recognition. And then as a united front, we can be having those conversations, again, with humility and with respect. Thanks.
Well, interestingly, we've seen in the last few years this sort of great powers approach to international affairs kind of pop back up. But, one of the things I haven't been hearing a lot about is the question about China and Russia, and what either of you might think about the Taliban's potential alliances with China and Russia. There's certainly rich natural resources. I mean, could they go the one belt, one road route? Is the Russian relationship, is it economic? Is it how are these things going to change, and how savvy might the Taliban be in approaching modern markets?
Yes, Mark, if I may, I'd like to ditto you what you just said. I agree with you completely. And also, you probably heard General Milley, I think, who said yesterday or the day before, that he could actually conceive of cooperation with the Taliban in certain areas, especially with the Daesh Khorasan issue, which is, a problem for the Taliban and a problem for this country in the world. And the Taliban have said, Mujahid said yesterday that the Taliban would like to establish all kinds of relationships with the United States and, the rest of the world. They specifically said we need and want good relationships with the United States. So, yes, I mean, I think instead of demonizing people and lumping them with, there are people here who can't understand the difference between the Taliban and Daesh, the Taliban Qaeda, the Taliban and Tariq, Hizb Islami, Uzbekistan. The Taliban have said repeatedly they have no international agenda beyond their borders. They're just sick and tired of being occupied. They want the occupiers to leave. And as I said, yes, I think it would have been nice if Mr. Biden had said, we lost the war. I'm sorry, we lost another war. So, that would have been very nice. I think he would have secured this place in history. As regarding, the re-declaration of Cold War against China and Russia, we clearly saw this. I mean, unfortunately, we have a political economy in this country that is built on war, on imperialism, we need to think of having a normal economy. We shouldn't need enemies all the time, But also, if you have a problem with China and Russia, deal with them. But don't deal with it in Afghanistan through Afghans on Afghan soil, on Afghan pain and suffering and anguish and destruction. It's none of our business. It's between them, the so-called superpowers. It seems, as I said, if the Taliban believe, and we have to realize these people were just a bunch of guerrillas, about 70,000 guerrillas. Most of them are wearing sandals, as you can see. And they don't know how to govern, and they have enormous amounts of problems right now in Afghanistan. You know what they have inherited? A country that is exhausted, destroyed, 800,000 pounds of bombings in the last 20 years. You can imagine. And there are, the Daesh, et cetera, the drought, diseases, a country that can't feed itself, people are about to starve. It's not simple. Even if we made the United States government in charge of Afghanistan right now, it would be facing a lot of challenges. So I think you're right. We need to, a little humble and, give people some credit, engage them, help them, mentor them, lead them, guide them, and see what happens.
Great. Thanks, Zaher. Let's switch gears a little bit and incorporate some of the questions we're getting from audience. This is a good question for you, Mark. Has the International Medical Corps been able to obtain and distribute COVID vaccine to local Afghans? And what plans are in place to vaccinate evacuees?
Good question.
IMC was involved in COVID education and in spreading the word and explaining the value of vaccination. The Afghan public health system was actually distributing the vaccinations that were made available by COVAX, China, India, some other countries. I think the United States more recently. But so IMC and the other big humanitarian organizations were not yet involved. Now, I don't know what condition the Ministry of Public Health is in right now, whether they're able to continue to play. So perhaps the humanitarian organizations will get involved in actually distributing and administering the vaccinations. One of the issues to discuss with the Taliban is whether they will support and allow vaccinations in the rural areas. They had a mixed record on this before they took over. In some provinces, when our own staff went to a local Ministry of Public Health clinic to get vaccinated, they were stopped by the Taliban. In other provinces, they were not stopped. So this is an issue that's going to have to be clarified by the new leadership in Kabul. Is where are they on And as far as evacuees, that will be up to each country that's receiving them, but I'm pretty sure it will be at the top of the checklist. I know that friends of mine from Afghanistan who have recently been evacuated to Canada are in quarantine for 2 weeks for this very reason. So my guess is that the receiving countries are going to be putting COVID first on the checklist as part of the resettlement process.
Great.
Good. If I may add very quickly, earlier when there was help coming from outside in terms of money, medicine, respiratory machines, in quite a few cases, they were sold on the black market or even exported to Pakistan, but yesterday, first plane by the World Health Organization, I think, that had medicine will travel from Pakistan to Kabul, Afghanistan. So, and also I should point out that the Minister of Public Health, actually, Mark, is one of the few ministers who stayed behind. I just saw a picture of him, in a hospital. He stayed behind. He says, "Where should I go? These people need help, and I'm going to stay here." So, as I said, we need to give the Taliban a little space, a little time, but help in mentoring and conditions. And if they don't, live up to their rhetoric or to international norms and standards, we then go from there. But let's give them a chance instead of dismissing them out of hand, and lumping them with other groups, etc. That's not the way to do it, because again, there's a whole nation, 34 million Afghans who are suffering right now because of its history.
Well, so to redirect a little bit, we have a question from one of the audience members. Foreign Policy magazine reported that the Taliban is set to name Hibatullah Akhundzada, the group's top religious leader, as Afghanistan's new supreme leader. To me, this looks a little bit like the Iranian structure of supreme leader, council, president. but he's described as a hardline cleric. If this is an accurate report, does this appointment suggest that the Taliban will rule much like they did previously?
Mm-hmm. Would you like Mark to go first, or would you like me? Or
I would love you both to jump in and give us some brief
okay.
thoughts on that.
Let me do it very quickly. There have been meetings. It's interesting, that the Taliban, since August 15th, they have been talking almost nonstop to the different leaders who were part of the previous government, people who were outside of the government, and clerics and so forth. It's interesting that you should know that, as you know, Karzai and Abdullah and Hikmatyar haven't left the country, and they have had meetings, with them, endless meetings about, and Taliban are on record saying they are interested in, they will, in fact, in a day or so, declare an inclusive government structure that would include, as they put it, all ethnic, religious, regional groups, and which would look like Afghanistan. Now, yes, I think I think they're more thinking about like the Iranian model. And they have said, we would like to have women in the government, but not as ministers. They have said that people should go to university, but not co-education. And they said there will be a supreme leader who will not be a president or a leader, but sort of a religious leader, and then an 11-person council, sort of not council of ministers, but council of, functionaries, I think, and then underneath it, other kinds of people. It seems like they really are thinking about the Iranian model, we'll see. Yes, Mark, I'm sorry. Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, I don't know much to add other than, I think we all have to be a little chill right now, as my sons would say, not overreact to announcements like this. Some of the most hard-lined people in this conflict, I think, or in any conflict around the world in history, tend to moderate a bit when they're in charge. Things look a lot different when you're responsible for and you're accountable for ruling a country of 34 or 35 million people who need help. So I would say to the Taliban, what's important now is to get on with the business of governing. And I think what we'll find, I hope what we'll find, is that whatever the prior views of the folks that they appoint, I think the realities on the ground are going to require everyone to compromise, become more moderate, to try to bring some change at a time when Zaher and I have both said there are tremendous needs on the ground. This is not a country that is doing well. This is a country where the people need a lot of help. And yes, we need to do our best to build a bridge so that we can provide the support that they need to help those people. So let's see how this, if this is true reporting, let's see how he performs now and not be too concerned about that in the past. Thanks.
Right. The one thing we can add is like women, there was a demonstration of women in Herat yesterday saying, they're asking for women's rights. And there was no interference, there was nothing. The other day there was a demonstration in Kabul by women, asking for this and that. And when you look at the leaders, when they talk to the press or so, you see men and women, and you see people, with no head cover or a turban or anything else. So I have a sense and I don't think we should think of Taliban as a monolith. I'm sure there are differences. It's a big movement made up of all kinds of people, and I'm sure, ideologically, its members are in different places. So the sense I get and indications are that at least the leadership, most of the leadership, seems to be quite sensible and know their responsibility to the nation, but also their place in the world. They keep saying, the war is over, as President Biden would say. They say too, the war is over, let's live together, let's work together, and we need to think about governing and building the country. And we should, as I said, we should give them a little space, a lot of support and guidance, and put conditions on them.
So I want to thank you both. I wanted to bring it back to how we started, which was focusing on a way forward. I think regardless of one's politics or perspective, when you look at the situation in Afghanistan, we were looking at a nation in need, a people in need, and we bring this back to the focus on people. That's how we move this forward. And that's, we talked about volunteering. One of the things we like to do with World Oregon is not just present something and say, oh my God, isn't that awful? But what are the action points? How does one engage? How do we connect to the world in a way that is meaningful? So I'm going to post again some of the resources for local organizations and national organizations. For those around the country, you can find your regional organizations within some of those organizations if you click on them. But a couple things briefly, Mark and Zaher, of how we can help and how we can keep compassion and empathy on the front burner as we navigate a global crisis here.
Let me start this one. I would say to our audience, put yourself in the shoes of an Afghan refugee family who's just landed in Portland or Minneapolis. You're scared to death. You don't know which end is up. Your kids are unhappy after a very long flight. And you're very worried about the future. Imagine how much it would mean to you if people in the community reached out to you with the offer to drive you to a bank to open an account. If they brought you your best tuna casserole. Well, no, we don't want to do that to Afghans. Maybe something better than that. It means a lot to an arriving family to have a friend. And I know there's people in the audience who, when I suggested you make a contribution to some of the humanitarian organizations, said, well, I can't afford that. Well, you can afford other help. You can reach out with the offer of a lift somewhere, or a meal, or just a chat, a cup of coffee. These families, many of them know no one. So let's, show them that one thing they always heard about, that Americans are generous, good people. Let's show them that side. Let's show them they are welcome. Let's show them that we are there to help, and we welcome them to our communities. And as I said before, believe me, this will enrich your family as well. Getting to know an Afghan family and learning a little bit about their culture and their language and their food is great. And we learned this in my family by welcoming that Syrian family. So reach out. America becomes more diverse, stronger, and you will make a friend along the way.
Yes, good. Are you done, Mark? If I may add, one, I call on the corporate press to please act responsibly, intelligently, and with integrity regarding international affairs. I would ask the people to please educate themselves about the world around them. There's a lot of money being spent and a lot of lives being, sacrificed. And for what reason? So please learn about the U.S. and the world at large. I think people who make it, Afghans who are, I think a lot of them are economic refugees who make it to the outside world, especially the West. I don't worry about them a great deal because I think there are a lot of good people and agencies in this country that will take care of those people. But I do worry about the bulk of the nation, the 34 million people who are left behind. And once, this excitement, media created excitement is over, I'm afraid they will be forgotten. So I remind people, please, to not forget, Afghanistan and other places. But also, I think Americans need to, think hard about what is it about our political economy that requires conflicts, wars, clashes, and 800 bases throughout the world. Why can't we organize our economy, our society, our culture, our lives differently where we don't need war and conflict, and how to control the military, industrial, CIA, and media complex?
Great. Thanks a lot, Zaher. I want to bring Derek back on.
Thank you.
Take us out into the afternoon. Appreciate Zaher and Mark, both of your perspectives. And Derek, it is yours.
Thank you very much, Tim. Thank you for asking us and the
Thank
audience.
you, Zaher Wahab and Mark Ward, for joining. And as we close out today, a big thanks to our partners at Global Minnesota. Again, to note that as you've seen here today, it's a robust discussion of different perspectives. We're nonpartisan organizations, and our job really is to put those ideas out there for discussion. And you're not going to agree with them all, and you'll have different perspectives, but hopefully, you'll come away with feeling challenged, and as Tim posted in the chat, a way to connect with resources in your community or nationally to help those in need. So thanks again for joining us. Keep an eye out on the World Oregon and Global Minnesota websites and our other World Affairs Council members for future webinars coming up, not just on Afghanistan, but other hot issues of the day. Ask you all to stay safe with COVID, and we'll see you on a future event. Thanks so much.
Yeah. Thank you. Thank you. Have a good day and be safe.